Okay, we're back. We're here with some more Murderous Gaze, and today I'm giving you the entire plot of If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, which is a dark academia novel that was published in 2017. It is like kind of the TikTok big three up there with Secret History and Babel. So let's get into it because there's a lot of shenanigans, and this book is interesting. The book opens with the prologue, and right off the bat we meet our main character, Oliver. His name is Oliver Marks, if you need to know, and he is handcuffed to a table, and you're like, what the is going on? And then we realize that he is in prison for unaliving Richard Sterling, who is his fellow or his former at Delacour Conservatory, which is where they are Shakespeare students. And we also meet Detective Colborne, who greets Oliver, really reciting the first line of Hamlet in his head. And Detective Colborne comes up and he's like, congratulations on your parole, because Oliver has been in prison for 10 years and finally got successfully paroled. And he's like, yep, did it, old man. And there's a really tense vibe between them, and you come to find out that Detective Colborne visits Oliver every 2 weeks and questions him about what happened with Richard, because Detective Colborne does not buy the story Oliver and the rest of his peers told about what really happened that night. I need to put you right here, like I'm balancing and it's driving me nuts. But Oliver never says anything, and he basically sticks to his story. But Detective Colborne's like, listen, surprise, I retired, so I can't arrest you, double jeopardy, I also no longer have jurisdiction, so I want to know what happened that night. And Oliver is like, you know what, fine, out of here in 2 weeks, pick me up, we'll go back to Delacour, and I will finally tell you the truth and the real story of what happened the night that Richard died. And Colburn kind of does this by like getting Oliver to unburden himself from the truth and let his truth out and let it be known. At the end, he kind of just begrudgingly agrees, and he doesn't really seem to buy what Colburn is selling. This book is cool. It doesn't go by chapters, it goes by acts and scenes like it is a traditional play. So we have Act 1, Scene 1, and that is September 1997 at Delacour Classical Conservatory in Broadwater, Illinois. Anyways, and here we meet our 7 main characters. We have Oliver, Meredith, Richard, Pippa, Alexander, Ren, and James. They're all 4th year drama students. What's interesting about Delacour is every single year you have to re-audition to get in. So let's say you are studying to be a theater major and you're a sophomore. You audition for your junior year, you do your monologue, your play, or whatever, and you don't get back in. Delacour does not do transferable credits. It's kind of like got Hamden syndrome in that it does its own thing and nobody can really tell it what to do. So if you leave this school, you are starting back from zero, and it's extremely expensive. Although they also have Hamden syndrome, and since like they give out scholarship, they're like, here, just come here, you will come here. That's why there's only 7 of them, because it's extremely rare to make it through all 4 years. However, if you can come out with a degree from Delacour, you basically can get whatever job in whatever entertainment industry you want, whether that be Broadway, movies, commercials, whatever. They all obviously want to be actors. So they are very close. They have been together since the beginning. They also are very isolated in terms of where they live. They all live in something they call the castle, which is their dorm. It's like a big, huge turret type place. I didn't put it on here, even though a lot of stuff takes place there, just because I couldn't figure out how it looked. So I didn't have a reference for it, but it kind of is like a turret that's on the edge of a lake. And I put the lake here because it's very important, so remember that for later. But it has a library, it has a kitchen, and it's pretty big. Some of them have single rooms and some of them share rooms, predominantly Oliver and James. So when we first meet them, they're all kind of just sitting together in the library. They're talking about the upcoming year and the auditions and the part that they're gonna play. Right off the bat, you get the vibe that Richard is kind of a dick and Alex is just over it. He's like, I don't understand why we audition because we're always cast in the same roles. James is always the good guy, I'm always the villain. Richard is always the king or the tyrant. Meredith is the femme fatale, while Ren is repeatedly the ingenue. With Philippa, they also have her, I don't think cross-dress would be the right word, but this is the word that they use. She often plays male characters because she is not feminine in the terms of the school's eyes. It's so annoying. Justice for Pip, love her down. Oliver is always the good guy sidekick. He's just there to make James look better. Remember how I said these two are roommates? They're very close. I would say they're probably best friends. They were roommates. Oliver's talking about how everything's going to be the same and he's going to spend another year being the supporting character, and he can't really decide if he hates it or likes it or he's indifferent. And James is kind of being a little weird, and he's like, I think this year, this spring, you will have the chance to be the tragic hero. And Oliver's just kind of like, okay, they're never going to give me a different part. But James is a little bit delusional. He's a little bit bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and he looks at the world kind of through rose-colored glasses because he is the favorite. He's like the Maddie, you know? So the next morning they wake up and they head over to the Fab, which is what they call their fine arts building. Kind of cute. And they are going to audition for the fall play, which is Julius Caesar. And Oliver is just talking about how they've made it through 4 rounds of cuts, and he doesn't know if that is attributed to talent or luck, and for himself he thinks it's the latter and counts himself very lucky just to be around everybody. But he does say that whether it's luck or talent that got them all there, they really work together as a group, and he really likes the structure of the group. So Oliver is sitting in the audience and he's just kind of watching everyone's audition, and he watches Richard, who does a soliloquy from Henry V. He also goes and gives his own, which is from Pericles, which are also both Shakespearean plays, adaptations, works, whatever the correct term is. So we go on to Act 1, Scene 3. Missions are complete, and they're at their local favorite restaurant, which is called the Boar's Head, and they always go there to celebrate, or after auditions, or really ever. It's just kind of like their hangout spot outside of their school. Just there eating and waiting for assignments, and then Ren comes bursting through the door and she's all excited, and basically everything that they thought was going to happen happens, except for Philippa has 3 parts and Oliver has 2, which is kind of weird. And Richard, of course, got the role of Julius Caesar. Tensions are high, they are feeling uncomfortable. There's a slightly rancid vibe in the air. So Act 1, Scene 4, the first time we meet the lake. This is a place they love to hang out. They also form here later on in the book. They're all kind of hanging out, and Meredith suggests skinny dipping, and everyone's kind of like, girl. James makes a rude comment to her. A lot of tension brewing between them, but you don't really understand why yet. Richard is really happy. He's like, it's gonna be a great year, and at the end we're gonna graduate and we're gonna made it. And Oliver is like, yeah, I can't believe I'm gonna make it. My dad was pissed as when I applied to Delicar, he was ranting and raving and spitting all over himself. But look at me now. And his father kind of just ignores what he's doing, which we will see later on. And Alex is just like, I wish my mother cared enough to protest about where I went to school. She literally could give less. James talks about his dad, who is a professor, and how he was kind of brokenhearted that James wanted to be an actor because his dad always hoped that James would become a poet. And then you find out that Richard and Ren are cousins. They both come from an acting family, and they were super happy that they both got in and that they both done so well. So they kind of have a dream life. And Philippa says nothing. You will learn throughout this book that you will learn nothing about Philippa. The first time we kind of get a little peek into them beyond Delacour. And one thing you also have to remember, just like Richard Papin, Oliver Marks is addicted to lying, okay? He literally is in jail. So you can believe anything this man say. And this is the end of the first act, and you kind of realize that although they are super close and they all do the same thing, even though they know that, like, okay, the cast list is going to be the same every year, they still have little surprises and stuff. And it's because they all have their own individual outlooks on life and their own individual motivations. And you see this because Oliver is in his head like, I don't know, guys, like, y'all have to work really hard and be the main character and carry the whole play. C's get degrees, you know what I mean? So he's like, we both go to the same college, and I'm kind of okay with just being in the background. Like, I'm cool with just being a best friend. And you see James being like, no, I want to expand and I want to grow. These tensions and these diversions from the status quo, it's gonna shake the table. It always does. So the next day they go to class, and we get to meet Gwendolyn, who is their teacher director. She's very eccentric, very outspoken, kind of histrionic, and definitely plays favorites. Her favorites are Richard and James and Meredith. It's quite obvious. But she also thrives on kind of making them feel uncomfortable. Instead of destabilizing them to allow them to grow creatively, she just likes to destabilize them to torture them. She starts off with this assignment where everybody has to come up open and honest and vulnerable with the class and say their worst fears. And everyone's like, not doing that. So Meredith, she volunteers and she goes and she stands up. She starts to be vulnerable, and Gwen's like, no, this is not enough. We need you to say it. And in front of everybody, she says, my fear is that I am more beautiful than I am intelligent or talented, which is crazy to admit because throughout this entire novel, Meredith is simultaneously praised and vilified for her looks, and she uses them to her benefit, and they are also used against her. I find her to be a nuanced portrayal of what pretty privilege actually looks like in real world application. And the rest of them come up. Oliver's like, I'm scared that I'm always going to be mediocre, and James is like, I'm scared that I'm one note. Ren's, I'm scared I'm forgettable. And they're all just opening up and they're being really vulnerable, and instead of it kind of like bonding them and bringing them together, it's kind of like giving them sore spots to like push at on each other, and it's really worsening the mood, and everyone's just like uneasily watching each other go up and say these things. So after that, they leave Gwen's class and they go meet Frederick, who is another kind of teacher director. He works as kind of a direct foil to Gwen. James and Oliver are talking about how Gwen is just ruthless and has no shame, and Frederick is very nurturing and loving, and he is responsible for teaching them like the social, cultural, intellectual parts of acting and into the plays they perform, and kind of applying what society was like back then and what the rules were to better interpret what Shakespeare was trying to say. Obviously, because if you're looking at something through a modern lens, it might seem silly or frivolous, which back then it might have been a super big deal and super provocative to do or say. Just like Julian, he makes them a cup of tea, and they all sit in class and drink the tea, and they just kind of observe each other while they're talking about Shakespearean tragedies, which is their focus for the year. If you've ever seen a Shakespearean tragedy, then you'll know almost every single person in it, especially the main character, has an unhappy ending. And everyone is kind of like, well, that doesn't really make any sense because we're doing Julius Caesar and that's more of a history play, not really a tragedy. Everyone's kind of agreeing, and Oliver is like, well, actually it is kind of a tragedy because it's personal and it was a vendetta that was used to be political. Frederick is like, well, maybe the true tragedy of Julius Caesar is that he was by his own friends. Everyone is kind of like, tea. So then in scene 7, you meet Dean Hollenshed, and he is just giving the opening speech and welcome everybody back to campus, and he tells people to live boldly even to the point of making enemies. So he just continues on to tell them do not waste their time here, and he goes so far as to say do not waste 1 minute of your life living boldly and not pursuing what you want. It's such a dog eat dog dogma at Delacour. Say that 5 times fast. So they all leave to go to class, where we meet Camillo, and he is their combat instructor. He kind of teaches them the visceral and violent, the human part of Shakespeare, and he is responsible for teaching them on-stage combat because, you know, Julius Caesar is quite literally about war. And when they're set up into partners a la Basquiat War College, they're sparring, and James accidentally nicks Oliver with his watch, and he draws blood, and they both are like, oh my god. Oliver literally says he feels like he was struck because James would never hurt him, and James is like so shooky that he drew blood, and everyone else around them is like, what is going on with y'all? And that's the first indication that you kind of get that something between them is a little bit different than the rest of the friendship. From there, we kind of move on, which is their first unscripted practice of Julius Caesar, and Richard is on one. He is pissed because Alex and James continuously need Gwen to tell them their lines. It's their first unscripted practice, so they're not used to practicing without their scripts, and normally they would be just on the money, but everything is a little bit switched up, so they're getting their footing, and he has like zero tolerance for it. He's like through. He gets so mad, he starts screaming and ranting and raving and getting in Alex's face, and Gwen is like, okay, we're taking a break and you need to calm yourself down, and the others are just like, what the fuck? And Meredith and Ren are like, yeah, we're gonna try to work on it. And they just go back to reading their lines and just kind of chalk it up to Richard being Richard. But they say it's weird because he was never really like this. Even though he's kind of always been cocky and a little bit arrogant, he's kind of different this year. And they don't really understand why. October is kind of flying by and the Halloween performance is getting closer and closer. So they are simultaneously practicing Macbeth while practicing Julius Caesar. And he uses a line from As You Like It, which is a Shakespearean comedy, to talk about how fast time is going. It's kind of fun to see them use those little Easter eggs. You guys didn't know I was an English major, journalism minor before I did content creation full-time, so I've sat through a lot of Shakespeare. And again, Gwen is on this kick of them like being honest with themselves, so she has them go in front of the class and say what their biggest talent is, and everyone can basically go up and do it. Meredith is like, yeah, I know I'm smart, and Pip was like, I'm resourceful, and Oliver goes up and he draws a blank. He literally is like, I don't know what my particular talent is or what the greatest thing about me is. And James immediately speaks up and he's like, you are the most generous of all of us. You're the best of us. You help us shine on stage and you are such a good friend in person. You're crazy. And Oliver's kind of just on a high for the rest of the day. And after Gwen's, of course, they go to Frederick's and they're talking about Macbeth and Caesar. And they're talking about the differences between the two and which would be the tragic hero in each play. Everyone kind of agrees, but of course, Richard is like, I think Caesar is the tragic hero because the play is named after him and it's his that the play is kind of ultimately about. But everybody else is kind of like, no, I think Brutus is actually the tragic hero because he is fighting for the greater good of Rome, even though what he's doing technically is a betrayal and would hurt him too and would hurt his friend. The conversations, the vibe is a little rancid. You get the sense that this combo is not just about Caesar and Brutus and it's a little bit personal. They start to argue and go back and forth and Richard's like, well, of course people would support a spineless person like taking out the leader to get what he wants. And James is like, well, if there's a tyrant, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. James and Richard get so heated that they end up cussing each other out and insulting each other, and everyone else is like, chill, bro. Kind of calm down, but you get the vibe that something wicked this way comes. Like, they are not getting along. So everything's kind of chill, and all of a sudden, before Oliver can blink or sneeze, it's Halloween and they're doing their performance of Macbeth at the lake. They still do not know who is who outside of their own character. That's the surprise. Oliver shows up as Banquo and lo and behold, James is Macbeth, and now they understand why Richard has been on James's head and why he's been so annoyed, because Richard is supposed to be Macbeth. And they are kind of just like confused. They get to the lake and obviously Ren, Meredith, and Pip are the three witches, if you've ever seen Macbeth, and they cannot find Richard at all. They're going through the entire play, and at the end, James dumps fake blood all over Oliver, turning him into Banquo's ghost. It's a really symbolic moment that comes into play later on, and you're just like, ugh. And then everyone is like still with Richard, but they're acting it out, and then they just hear Richard's voice bellowing some of his lines off stage, like on the edge of the lake. No way he didn't get cast in the Halloween version of Macbeth. Like, this is a Delacour tradition, it's an honor. So everyone's like, if that's kind of what happened, no wonder he's mad. So afterwards, without Richard, they go out and they're so happy and they're just like, we killed it. And everyone's like, this is one of the best senior performances we've seen, and this particular group have really great chemistry because everything they act is so personal and so felt by all of them. And after partying at the castle and having a huge Halloween party, Meredith is like begging Ren to go find Richard and get him to come out, and Ren's like, okay, I will do that. They all go to the lake together and they're playing chicken, which if you don't know what chicken is, I think it's an American game where you are in the water, typically on your knees, and somebody gets on your shoulders and you battle somebody who's in the same position, and you guys kind of put your arms together and you like try to basically knock them off into the water. Very dangerous and competitive, quite fun though. Alexander and Pip are a duo and they're undefeated. They've taken everybody down, and Meredith is like, girl, I got this in the bag, and she's kind of begging Richard to play, and he's being a little spoil sport, doesn't want to, so she's like, Oliver, be my partner, because she knows James would never. So Oliver is like, okay, but he thinks Meredith is gorginkus and he finds it really hard to concentrate. So they're playing and they're about to lose. Oliver at the last minute saves it for them and they win and they're super excited. Richard is like, if steam could come out of a human's ear, he would be frothing. So then James and Ren decide to play against Meredith and Oliver. Richard is up like a bat out of hell. He is screaming mad and he's like, do not put your filthy hands on my cousin, do not touch her. And they start beefing, and then all of a sudden Richard grabs James, holds his head underwater and starts to drown him. Well, every single person around him is like pulling his arms off. They're screaming, the girls are crying. This book went from like chill to no chill expeditiously swift. So he is literally underwater fighting for his life. Oliver was like punching the back of him. And Richard finally lets him go right at the last second, and James comes up and he's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, what's wrong with you? And Richard just runs off, and the rest of them are just like traumatized, and they all sit there for a minute. Each one by one end up going to bed till it's just James and Oliver on the beach, and they're kind of just looking at each other like, what the actual just happened. So things are not good at Delacour Conservatory. And so now you see the parallels of Brutus and Caesar, and we also know from the beginning of the book that Richard is dead. So did it, because at this point everybody wants him gone. And when you have somebody like Oliver who is really generous and is definitely okay to play second fiddle to somebody that he likes, they butt heads with somebody like Richard who demands attention. I'm not saying I agree with what might happen, but I'm just saying, you're not gonna draw my man, okay? And what I like about ML Rio is the fact that what they're doing on stage is literally bleeding into their real life, and the idea of being super physically violent to your friends just like fine, because Gwen and Frederick are in the corner like, method acting, feel it, and they're just like, maybe not that much, King, but he was like, I'm gonna show you why I should have been Macbeth. After Richard almost had James swim with the fishes, we get a time jump to the present where Philippa is picking up Oliver from prison. He is finally out and he is paroled. You find out that she also has been visiting him every 2 weeks since he was incarcerated, so 10 years. And she also reveals a lot about what's happened to everybody. So Meredith has went on and she's actually a famous actress. We've been new. Alex is in this like avant-garde kind of like provocative traveling theater group, probably performs at the Box. If you know, you know. She doesn't talk about James, obviously does not talk about Richard, and Ren is also not spoken about for the time being. After they're done talking, they put on an audiobook of Iris Murdoch's The Sea, which is about a person who is in the London theater world. It's very glamorous and glitzy, planning to retire and write a memoir about their affair with their mentor, who is a man, and the main character in that novel plans to spend the rest of his life amusing himself with a young female actress by the name of Lizzie, and basically nothing works out. His life kind of goes to shit, and it's a beautiful novel that's about humanity and jealousy and envy and loss and grief. It won the Man Booker in 1978, I believe. So for her to use that novel, I think I've seen this film before. Didn't like the ending. And they arrive at Delacour and they meet Detective Colburn, and Oliver is really sad. He says that he realizes that now Delacour was more of a cult than it was a school where you could kind of excuse and explain anything away for the sake of doing it for art. He's really upset being here. We find out that Pip and Camille are dating, which I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm happy that she's happy at the very least. And Colburn is like, okay, we're here, you had your time with your friend, I need to make sense of what happened. And Oliver just looks at him and he's like, I can barely make sense of what happened. But he starts to tell the story of the events leading up to Richard's unaliving. So it is time again for them to perform Julius Caesar. So they are taking professional portraits in their costumes, be hung around the school. Alexander tells Oliver that he thinks Meredith and Richard broke up because he has not seen them talking to each other. And everyone's like, well, yeah, if I saw my boyfriend try to drown his friend, I'd probably break up with him too. And also Ren and Richard have been very distant, which is weird for them. They're cousins and they're very close, not in a creepy way, not in a Camilla and Charles way. Richard kind of just is a very overprotective, almost like abusive brother to Ren. What Oliver notices is that when Ren and James are getting their pictures taken. James is like twirling Ren's hair like in his finger, patting her back, and he's like, oh, okay, like noted, making note of that, and maybe that's why. It's the first time since they are going to see Richard since the incident, and they go to dress rehearsal and they're all in their garb and they are running through the play. And during the assassination scene where James is Brutus is going to assassinate Richard as Caesar, Richard is being really violent and actually not doing what Camille taught them, and James goes to Oliver after practice and shows him bruises that he has all over him from the assassination scene. And James insists that Oliver do nothing because Oliver's like, I'm telling Frederick and Camille right now. He was like, do not do that because they will do nothing and it will only get worse. I'm going to win this battle with silence. I only have a year. I'm just gonna sweat it out, and then I will never have to work with or see this man again. Oliver is ready for war, but he digresses and he acquiesces. There's changing angles, by the way. I'm definitely not gonna be able to film this in one day because this is the thick book. By now, we have established there are some interesting dynamics going on between the group. We have James and Ren, James and Oliver, Meredith and Oliver, James and Oliver. Really, Oliver is kind of messy. They're kind of just avoiding him and they're not really hanging out like they used to. And during the next dress rehearsal, Richard is being really annoying and super violent. He actually pushes Meredith so hard that she falls down the stairs and cracks her elbow, gushing blood. And Oliver is like ready for war because Meredith throughout this have been very flirty, and there have been some times where like they were playing chicken or she's kind of come to him and kind of like sweetened up to him and stuff like that. And Oliver is trying to get to Richard and Alexander is holding him back. Gwen is like so annoyed. She's like, what is going on? Stops the rehearsal because Meredith and Richard are just arguing and Meredith is still gushing blood from her elbow, and when she realizes she's bleeding, she storms away. And Gwen is like, you better apologize, because if you do not apologize, I'm gonna give your part to Oliver. Oliver's like, why'd you put me in it? And literally that could not have made her even more mad. So he storms off to kind of take a breather, and he comes back and accuses Meredith of overreacting, says she's being dramatic, and he gives a shitty apology. Nobody's buying it, least of all Meredith and Oliver. And when he walks away, he turns to Oliver and he's like, don't start learning my parts just yet. And Oliver's like, girl, get like, I'm not trying. And Oliver is like, oh my god, I am done. Like, today is just enough. So he goes in the dressing room and he's taking off his makeup. In comes Meredith and she propositions him. She goes up to him and she's like, I really want to kiss you right now. Like, I know you want to kiss me. And Oliver, he is tempted because he really does like her. But he literally is like, the only reason you want me is because I'm available and like you need to have someone's attention. And kissing you is not worth risking Richard's wrath. And Meredith is so hurt by this. She's like, I've been giving you vibes that I've liked you. I thought you were sweet ever since I met you first year. And my boyfriend's a dick and I've been over him and I've been wanting to break up with him, but I literally can't because there's like 7 of us. And the first time that everyone would kind of be on my side and be like, okay with it, like, you want to pull this? Like, oh, by the way, like, I would have been facing his wrath too. So like, if I can stand up to my abusive boyfriend, like, Oliver kind of feels like he stuck his foot in it and he's just like, whatever. And later on, Oliver and James go for a run and he's very hesitant to tell James about Meredith because James doesn't really like Meredith at all, really. They have tension and they're kind of just always bickering, and they go through the hall and they see all the posters, and Richard's is this huge red scary looming poster of him as Julius Caesar. And James was like, listen, I don't think you need to be with Meredith. Like, she's not the girl for you. 1, because of Richard and his wrath, and 2, because she propositioned me our first year and tried to hook up with me, and when I turned her down, she went to Richard and she's been with him ever since, and she's probably trying to do that with you now. And we have bigger fish to fry because I'm almost certain that Richard is going to actually try to physically harm me during our live performance of Julius Caesar, and we won't be able to stop him or say anything. You really think he would try to harm me? But then like Oliver's like, well, he did try to drown you and he just threw Meredith down the stairs, so maybe you're right. And they're just kind of worried that everything everything that they've built is kind of falling apart. This is the part of the novel where, if you've seen my Dark Academia book retelling, I'll put a little card here. I talk about how it feels a little bit like it picks up speed really fast and like the characters are kind of rushed and flat. This is where we start to get into that area, just because once things kind of go left, they go all the way left, obviously. But also that is very on par with the Shakespearean tragedy. A lot of the female characters actually are very one note and very flat and static. So I get what Emma Rio was trying to do. And when they see Richard's big red hanging thing, it's so imposing and creepy because this theme version of Julius Caesar is themed as an election. So they are all dressing kind of as presidents and congresspeople and acting out the play of Caesar. So when they are him, it's very dark and it's very grim because they're all dressed as American politicians. And this book was published in 2017 after the 2016 American election, which we all know what happened there and then the subsequent fallout of that. So let's just give Emma Rio her flowers. It's opening night and they're fighting and they're acting out everything and it's really tense. Everyone's kind of been like avoiding each other. During the assassination scene, Richard smashes James' eardrum. All three of the boys, James, Oliver, and Alexander, are over it. Alexander hasn't really been in this novel. Like, he's in and out, but he's kind of off doing his own thing, which we will find out a little bit later. He is definitely on the side of James and Oliver. He's not Richard's fan by any means. And they all three decide that if Richard tries to hurt any one of them in the next act, they're going to actually put paws on him and not do fake fighting and beat this man in front of a live audience and nobody will be able to tell. So there's that. And they decide to do a signal with some lines from the play and a nod, and then they will literally know to attack on 3. So they all go to bed with that in mind. And although the show is a success, Oliver is like, okay, that was opening night, and the next night he's just gonna keep upping the ante to closing night, which who knows, he might actually try to unalive James and blame it on an accident, especially because it happened in front of a stage of witnesses. He's more likely to get away with it. And Oliver is pretty distracted throughout all of his classes. He's kind of ignoring what Gwendolyn and Frederick are talking about. And then the next night they do the performance, and once again they're at the scene, and Richard makes the first move, crushing Oliver like kind of by the neck, and all out madness ensues. Everyone just starts jumping on Richard, beating him, like kicking him, pounding him to the ground, trying to unalive him. They call it bedlam in the books. Philippa is literally thrown to the ground, like out of the way. She misses like all of her lines. Meredith misses some of her lines, and the audience is just like enthralled. And Richard eventually goes down, literally kicking and screaming, even though that's not what Julius did. And even though he is unalive, they can literally feel the rage reverberating off of him, and they know that as soon as they step off this stage, it's on this should happen. So after that, Frederick and Gwendolyn are kind of just like, okay, I'm not even gonna acknowledge that. I'll decide to have an after party since the opening weekend is over. I'll kind of stay outside smoking a spliff. And this is Colin right here, this little guy. He is a 3rd-year student, and he is so talented that sometimes when they need other parts that there are not enough 4th years to act in, they pull him up from the 3rd year. So he's really talented. He comes outside to tell them that Richard is upstairs alone, heavily drinking from a bottle of whiskey, like drinking to the point where it's going to be everyone's problem. And also Meredith is in the garden flirting with the cellist, which is a problem because Richard's room overlooks the garden and he's going to be able to see that. And they're kind of like, okay, well, that's like a problem for a different point, whatever, let me enjoy my little splifferini. And Oliver and Ren are talking, and Oliver confesses to Ren that Richard has been hurting them because Ren is very sweet, she's very fragile, she's very innocent, and they kind of try to keep her out of it. And she also loves Richard deeply, but knows he's like not a good person. And in that moment, Ren admits that Richard frightens her sometimes. He gets up and leaves, and he runs into James, who was upstairs reading, and all of a sudden they hear a commotion, like what is going on, and you find out that Richard has beat the cellist that was talking to Meredith so badly that they are on the way to the school infirmary, and he is in a blind rampage, destroying everything in front of him. And Meredith is like, stop, like, you're a bully, stop bullying us. stop attacking him. You use your strength and your physical power, because Richard's a big dude. And he calls her the SLUT word and she backhands it. Real, I support women's rights. And he goes crazy and all out war ensues. All the guys are physically holding him back because he's trying to get to her to attack her, and everyone's like, you're not gonna hit a girl, you're actually crazy if you think we're all gonna let you, because it's not just the 7 students, like it's a whole party full of people. After that, Meredith storms off and everyone's like, we got Richard, we'll keep him under control, you go check on Meredith. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna go check on Meredith. Like, so crazy you said that, like I was literally just thinking the same thing. So he goes to check on Meredith. She's on the stairs and crying, and they just look at each other and they start making out, just kissing, like passionately kissing. And after that, they go up to her room and they're on the bed and they're laying down and they're like making out, and all of a sudden Richard starts banging on the door. I know you're in there, who are you in there with? He doesn't know Oliver's in there, and Oliver and Meredith proceed to do what grown-ups do when they love each other. And while they're doing that, Richard is banging on the door, threatening to unalive everybody and frothing at the mouth. The next morning, Oliver wakes up in Meredith's room and he got anxiety down. He's like, I'm not even gonna address this, I'm not gonna wake her up. He's like, I gotta go to the bathroom. So he goes to the bathroom and he finds James, who is sick and basically like passed out, sleeping on the floor because he was vomiting and was drinking entirely too much. It is here that Oliver finds out from James that a first-year student saw Oliver and Meredith kissing and told every single person at the party. And Oliver is like, every person? Like even Richard? And James is like, actually, I don't know. Like, I think Richard went off into the woods or something because we didn't see him, and kind of maybe doesn't know. And James is like, and you're lucky, you know what I mean? Because like a one-night stand and he would just be like ruthless about it. And Oliver's like really defensive and he's like, Meredith isn't a one-night stand. And James is like, what do you mean? They kind of for the first time have tension in their friendship when James realizes that Oliver might actually like Meredith as well. After this, Oliver is like, I am done. He like takes some hangover medication, I think, and goes back to their room and flops on the bed. He didn't talk to Meredith or wake her up or anything, and he is still sleeping when he wakes up to Pip banging on his door, and James is also asleep, he realizes, and they're both in the room, and he's like, okay, this is how it should be. Like, I shouldn't be waking up next to Meredith. I should be waking up in my old bed across the room from my bestie. And she's like, get dressed right now and meet me at the dock. So they get dressed, they go down, and when they get to the dock, everyone's kind of standing in a semicircle and they're like, what's going on? But before they can speak, they notice something in the water, and upon further inspection, they notice that Richard is lying face up with his, well, face crushed in, and he is just covered in blood, and he dead. And they're all like shocked and silent and they're freaking out. They all kind of just feel queasy, and then all of a sudden Richard groans and reaches for them from the water. So they realize that he is in this water and he is still alive. Now mind you, okay, this water is frozen and it is cold, so they got to get him out quick. It jumps back to the present with Colburn and Oliver walking around the lake, and Colburn is asking him, why can't you just tell me what happened? Stop with all the performance, the poetics, the stories, etc. And Oliver is like, we basically blended our lives to the point where everything we did felt like a performance. Like the things that we did didn't feel real, and they didn't feel like they had real world consequences. So it's impossible to divorce the performance from the story. He also starts to talk more about his relationship from Meredith, if it was ever really real or if it was just part of a performance. And he talks about the fact that she refused to testify either for him or against him at his trial. Then we're back to Richard literally being in the water. James freaks out and rushes towards the water, but before he can get there, Oliver tackles him and starts quoting Hamlet, and Alexander is yelling that they should all wait as James and Oliver kind of like physically struggle because James wants to pull him out. The entire group is just sitting there weighing the options between Richard's recent behavior and how he's always treated them, and how live one of them or hurt them and probably would not feel any guilt. And they also talk about like their obligations as a friend, and also Ren as a family member, and Meredith, this is her, you know, recent ex-boyfriend. And then instead of them like saying anything, Emma Rio just puts like a line from Hamlet that says, "If it be not to come, it will be now." And nobody says it, and Oliver just silently reflects on the fact that they all sat there and watched as he died, and the relief that he felt when he watched Richard stop breathing. And they all simultaneously went around in a circle and agreed that they would let Richard pass. James, ironically enough, was the last to agree with this decision. So once James agrees, they're kind of like, okay, well, what are we going to tell the police? We need to get our story together. So they come up with this as their story, and they say that Richard was drunk, and prior to accident is what they're calling it, there had been no problems between any of them. They were all amazing, that he went out to the dock probably to relive Halloween or just to hang out by himself, fell, slipped because it's icy, smashed his head in, and could not swim to the shore because he had a brain wound. But before they can call the police to agree on this story, they're like, well, we need to make sure he's really dead because we thought he was dead first and he came back. So they agree that they need to check him, but none of them want to like wade in the icy water to touch their potentially dead friend. And once again, Oliver is like, I'll do it. And they all kind of stand like scared little ducks and children, like huddling from the wind as Oliver wades into the water and tests it for them, realizes that he is in fact dead, and then they can call the police. As you can see, this whole James saying, you're the best of us, you're the strongest of us, you're the best friend, this is all starting to come into play. Oliver, somebody who played the sidekick to the hero, kind of showing you how integral people who are often cast into those roles can be to keeping an entire friend group together, for better or for worse. They call the police, and immediately Delacour is swarmed. It's a popular school, it has a really good name. Dean Holinshed is annoyed as all get out, and you meet Detective Colburn, and one by one they interview all the students, and Oliver is the last to be interviewed by the detective, and he recited the agreed upon story, including that, you know, he went in the lake to check to see if Richard was alive, the one that rushed to try to save him, you know, that's part of their story. He just kind of walks out like, damn, Shakespeare couldn't have written a better story, to be honest. R.I.P. you would have loved this. Obviously, the castle is turned into a crime scene, so they can't stay there. So they are given dorms at Halsworth House, which is another dormitory that houses some other students. Obviously, Delacour isn't just for the acting students, and that off the bat alone destabilizes this close bond they had because they're no longer isolated up in this turret. From there, Dean Holinshed gives a speech, and he tells the rest of the campus about Richard, and his posters from Caesar are just hanging up, and he looks just so creepy. They're all just not in a good mood. Oliver talks about how Richard's death is giving them all super bad anxiety, and James and Alex actually get into a fight over something stupid, and Oliver is like, I think this might have been a bad decision. I think this could undermine our friend group. And Philippa just cites Macbeth to remind them not to fight. Alex is like, I don't care, like I'm gonna go look for alcohol and whatever I can to numb out my brain, and the rest of the group just decide to go to sleep. But Meredith cannot sleep, and she goes to Oliver's room because she doesn't want to sleep alone, and they just cuddle and hold each other and they fall asleep. After a little bit of investigation, everything is cleared and everything goes back to normal. Delacour cancels all of the rest of the shows and any performances from any other major for the rest of the year. Richard's death is ruled an accident, and they all go back to the castle and pack up to go home for Thanksgiving. Oliver normally stays home for Thanksgiving. He's very much Richard Papencoden. He doesn't really like his family, but this year the school is going to be closed, so he has to go back to his hometown, which is Ohio. And when he's at the castle, he sees Pip, and she's kind of like putzing and not really packing, and he doesn't know she has a place to go, so he kind of awkwardly like invites her, but she turns it down, and she just admits to him, I'm really scared that our friendship is gonna fall apart, and I don't want to go to Richard's memorial. Oliver is like, I don't want to go to Richard's memorial either, but they both kind of console each other, and they get ready to go send their ex-friend off. They're all ready, and Oliver goes to the beach where he meets James, because that's where they're gonna have Richard's service. How morbid. And James feels like the lake has turned on them, and what used to be their favorite place to hang out and the place they did one of their best performances now feels all imposing and really scary. He also tells Oliver not to keep hooking up with Meredith because the police will take it as motive for what happened to Richard, and Oliver is like, what are you talking about? Richard fell. What we did was messed up, but like we didn't hurt him. And he's really worried about this idea that Richard Richard could have been hurt. And James is kind of just like, no, you're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. Like, I don't want to make you anxious. Like, you do what makes you happy. I'm just looking out for you. And Oliver's like, oh, okay. Well, okay. Well, the service is starting and all of them sit together with the exception of Wren, who is sat with Richard's family, and Dean Hollenshed gives a speech and he talks about how Richard never got to be Henry in Henry v Part 1, really saying how sad it is he never got to perform his final performance as a Delacour student. And then Wren gets up and she explains that Richard was like her brother. She loved him so much, even though he was kind of flawed as a person. And she cites Twelfth Night, which is a Shakespearean comedy, to try to make sense in light of losing him. And when she's talking to the rest of the class, she cites Hamlet, suggests that they are definitely gonna be sad for a while and they definitely are going to mourn him, but they have to move on and they have to live their life or else everything will be for nothing. And then she just kind of goes back to her seat, and for the first time we see her break down and her and Richard's dad just bawl and cry and sob their eyes out. And awkward. After that, the entire group, again sans Wren, goes to the Boar's Head for Richard's wake, and they talk about holidays and how they're all miserable and they don't want to go and they'd rather be together. And Meredith is like, y'all can come to New York. My parents literally aren't going to be there. They don't care about me. Meredith is rich. She has a beautiful townhome in New York City and she will be alone for the holidays because her parents do not care and her brother is famous. While they're talking about this though, about Wren, and they say that while they can complain about their holiday breaks being bad, that her holiday break is going to be the worst of all. She might not even come back, and James is really upset by this idea and he's like insistent that she has to come back. Like, she must come back to Delacour and finish. Like, we're not her without her and she can't raise suspicion. And everyone's like, what are you talking about, raise suspicion? Like, dropping out of college after your cousin tragically died there is like probably the most normalist thing you can do. He's being weird. After at the Boar's Head, they all pack up and leave, and Oliver heads home for Thanksgiving, and here we meet his sisters Caroline and Leah. Oliver's father is immediately on one. He is talking to Carolyn, who is described as overly and scarily thin, that she needs to eat her food, while his mom is yelling at Leah, saying her shirt is too revealing. So his parents are very hypercritical of him and his two sisters. Leah is a sweetie though. She is really interested in everything that Oliver does and wishes she could see him perform. She asks him if he will be in Hamlet in the spring. His dad makes like a nasty comment about acting. He kind of says like acting isn't a real man's job, and Leah defends him, and the mom is kind of like, all right, you guys, let's stop. And Oliver just like, and after dinner, when Carolyn goes up to bed, Oliver's parents sit him down and they say that unfortunately they're not going to be able to pay for him to go to Delacour anymore because Carolyn is really sick and she needs to go to an inpatient treatment facility for her disordered eating. Oliver is not happy about this at all, and he's like, I am in my last year and you're going to literally make me quit school because Carolyn won't eat because you guys harass her 24/7. Like, it's not my fault. He's very unsympathetic to his sister's struggles, but I understand his parents are literally asking him to forsake his entire education because, like I said, Delacour does not do transfer credit. So Oliver is pissed and he just storms off. The next day he calls Delacour and he tells them, and they're able to arrange a financial aid situation for his final semester, basically taking care of the castle, the dorm room that they live in. Spends the rest of his day just kind of in his bedroom, and he talks about finding Shakespeare at 11 and how Shakespeare has kind of been the love of his life and his only companion, the one thing that has never turned on him, and spends the entire day just reading his book. Leah comes and she knocks on the door and she brings him a sandwich because he doesn't want to go to dinner because he's avoiding his family, and she begs him not to go back, to stay and to help and to not leave her here with Carolyn, who's very sick, and her parents, who are not good people. And Oliver says that he can't because he has a family in everyone at Delacour, and Leah is really hurt by this because she's like, I'm literally your blood. Like, if you need a kidney, I'm your best hope. And he's like, with the exception of you, I don't feel like the people in this house are family. And after he says that, she kind of understands, you know, what he means. After she leaves, he starts to read Rene Girard's A Theater of Envy, which is a very good book, by the way. there's so many good references in this book. And he starts to wonder if Richard was really their enemy and what jealousy means and what envy means. And he wonders why they agreed so quickly when Alexander was like, don't do anything, just leave him there, and how easily they all were able to come to that conclusion without talking about it prior. He's just really upset and conflicted with his feelings, so he decides to go to bed early. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, he hears a knocking on his door, and he goes downstairs, and James is here, who lives in California, flew all the way to Ohio to be with Oliver because he couldn't bear being in his house in California, but returning to Delacre wasn't an option. Oliver's like, my parents are gonna trip. They already hate that I'm an actor, and now they gonna think I brought a boyfriend home. He could not turn James away if he tried, and they snuggle up in bed, in his bed, and they discuss Hamlet, and they talk about the spring play and their parts and their friendships, and they kind of fall asleep. And in the morning, they wake up to Carolyn and Leah standing over them, staring at both of them in the bed, and they start to make jokes about them being boyfriends, and Oliver is kind of embarrassed, and James like doesn't seem bothered at all. Oliver looks over at James while he's getting dressed, and he calls Meredith and says that he can't visit her in New York for the holidays because James arrived unexpectedly. Meredith is like, of course he did. Of course he just had Thanksgiving with his family and then arrived unexpectedly, and her reply is really terse, and she just kind of hangs up the phone. Oliver and James spend the rest of their break together reading Shakespeare and hanging out, and the next morning he brings him down to his parents. Parents are actually like okay with it. They just are like, oh, nice to meet you, everything is okay. Now it is time for them to go back to Delacre. So they go back. His financial aid plan is that he has to clean, and he is totally fine with it. He is about to leave when he hears Detective Colburn's voice that piques his ear. He's like, I haven't heard this man's voice in a minute, and he's talking to one of his colleagues, Ned, who I did not put on here, sorry, justice for Ned, and he is saying they didn't buy what happened to Richard and that they are still investigating his death. And Colburn goes on to say that he doesn't trust any of them because they are all actors who are trained to lie, and after they leave, Oliver has this hallucination of a conversation with Richard, where Richard is basically like, why did you do this to me? I thought we were friends, like you're gonna get caught. And he's kind of really sitting with this manifestation of his guilt, and it leaves him feeling very like haunted and rattled. Just kind of gets the vibe something bad is about to happen. So because James and Oliver came back a little bit early, they're the first one there, and then when classes start on the first day, both Meredith and Wren are absent, and it's their midterm, so everyone's kind of concerned, but Oliver just goes on and gives a presentation from King John for his midterm. And after that, a couple days later, Wren and Meredith both return and emerge, and they all are really happy, and they're all happy that they came back and that their group is once again whole. Oliver and Meredith kind of have this awkward conversation, and it's very clear that Meredith feels like Oliver chose James over her romantically. This has now become a love triangle with Oliver smack dab in the middle, and he is kind of still oblivious or unwilling to admit it to us or himself. And he goes up to the deck, he sees Alexander, and they're just smoking and talking. He's like, you know, I never did figure out what you did that night. And this is where we come to find out that Alexander was with Colin. This is the first time that Alexander has openly talked about being with men, and Oliver tells Alexander about Colburn and the conversation he heard and how Colburn knows that he lied. Talk about why they decided to do what they did that night, and he really doesn't have any explanation. And then Oliver is like, you know, something that's been haunting me and been kind of like freaking me out is when we found Richard at the lake, there was no blood on the dock, only in the water. So if he hit his head, what did he hit? And Alex is like, that's something I've been thinking about the entire time too. After a couple days, they come back, and once again there is an envelope on their bed because this ended so well last time, and it is an invitation to the Christmas mask. Well, they will do their Christmas play, and they find out that it is Romeo and Juliet. Meredith goes to get the assignment, and Oliver follows her, and he apologizes, and he's like, you know what, I shouldn't have blown you off for the holidays, and I should have treated you with respect. And he's like, let's go on a date. Like I want to take you out. And and Meredith is like, okay, I guess. And they get their assignment is going to play Benvolio, which is Romeo's cousin, in the performance. Benvolio is an important character, as all side characters are in Shakespearean plays, and he is on a high because he goes on his date with Meredith to the Boar's Head. Their usual group table is occupied by other students, which kind of like throws him off, and he kind of realizes they're getting to the point where they're a little bit old news and they're about to be phased out of Delacour and what that means to exist outside of this insular bubble that they've been in for the past 4 years, that he's panicking. And this day is so awkward. They're sitting at a table and they're like arguing, kind of going back and forth over like the situation and like the status of their relationship. And Oliver's like, I don't want to spend the rest of my life or my time with you feeling like I'm Richard's understudy and like I'm the person that you want to be with because you can't have him. And I will not be the person you settle for just because you cannot have her. When I spent my whole life loving you. Amy March Hyde, rise up. More than him just not wanting to be Richard's understudy, he opens up to Meredith that he does not understand what Meredith sees in him, and he doesn't think that he is man enough for someone like her. And she replies that you are a good person, like you're such a good person, like more good than you understand, and the fact that you don't realize it, never treat me like I'm just my body or how I look. And in that moment he can really see Meredith for herself, and although their relationship is in limbo, they get up and they're leaving hand in hand. As they're walking out, a nearby student mutters that they are completely shameless. So people are judging and noticing the fact that a woman who was dating Richard, who died accidentally and tragically, is not really grieving in the way that she should, and neither are his friends. So that's why the police are back snooping around. I'm like, are y'all really that good of actors? I don't know. Anyways. This whole section of the book is just a lot of like midterm and school stuff because it's right before the play, so they're always giving speeches that are meaningful. Oliver delivers his speech, Wren gives us a speech from Richard III, and she's talking about a woman's pain and how women's pain can be really powerful, and she is so emotional and upset that she collapses on stage and everyone kind of freaks out. Oliver runs to the castle, announces that Wren collapsed, and James hurries to rush to be by her side. Alexander and Meredith arrive, and they're also freaking out and just waiting for the news. They're pretty sure it's the grief that's literally eating her from the inside out. They're waiting hours at this point, and James comes back, not having seen Wren, talking about how the police were there and this is a much bigger deal than they think. Alexander reiterates, listen, I don't care what you guys think. We're not doing anything. We're not saying anything. Already agreed. And all of them are kind of just like, no, we need to tell the truth. No, we need to stay silent. And they're kind of debating the difference between like unaliving somebody and just like letting them die. So they're like, well, if we do tell the truth and we tell what happened, we're gonna look terrible, but what does that look in terms of like prison sentencing? Could they sentence all of us? They're kind of really going back and forth on what they should do. Alexander is really falling apart. He is not acting like himself. He has frequently been getting into these type of skerfuffles and fights with people. So when Oliver is getting dressed for the mask, he is worried about him, and he goes find Alex, and he finds him doing Pepsi, if you know what I'm talking about, okay? And he's like, this is so stupid. Not only is this bad for you, but this puts all of us in danger. You're not acting like yourself and you're not on your A game. And Alexander is just not trying to hear it. It's just like, pass me another bumpski, like he's over it. So they head to the mask, and every single person outside of the Shakespeare students are in white, and they find out that Meredith is the prince, James is Romeo, Mercutio is Alex, Wren appears as Juliet. So the mask is happening, everything's going good, and obviously James and Wren have to kiss. That's the whole point of Romeo and Juliet, and they go at it. They're like passionately making out in front of like the entire school, and Oliver is like seeing red, overcome with jealousy in a way that he cannot explain. Interesting, because Rene Girard's Theater of Envy book I was talking about a minute ago are all about whether or not we truly desire or envy things because we want them or because other people have them. He feels like this might be the case, seeing James and Wren, and also James with him seeing Meredith like him, and whether him and James are kind of doing this dance around each other and avoiding the conversation. It's like, pfft. Yeah. So at this point, they are kind of just walking around Delacour, and Colburn turns to Oliver and he's like, you know, you keep talking about this experience and it sounds like hell on earth. Why do you think this happened? Like, do you blame the school? He goes, do you blame Shakespeare? And to the reader's surprise, Oliver admits that he actually does blame Shakespeare a little bit for what happens, but he ultimately says the issue again was that they all began to not be able to distinguish themselves from their characters, and they started to act as if they were in a play in real life, and that made the Shakespearean aspect of it all even more intensified because he felt like they were living it on and off screen. And when they're all together, they're kind of okay with keeping it together. As soon as they part, they end up falling apart, and he is really worried what's going to happen at the end of the year when they graduate. But he doesn't really have any time to worry about that because it's Christmas time, and Oliver goes home to Ohio, and it's fucking awful. As soon as he gets there, everyone's beefing, and once again Carolyn is struggling, and even though they took away Oliver's tuition, she hasn't been sent away yet, and she is not in a good mood. Poor Leah. She's just so sad and so lonely, and Oliver cannot handle the fighting and Carolyn's behavior, so he literally flees. Like, he runs and he decides to grab a bus and go visit Meredith in New York for Christmas because he knows she will be all alone. And there's this really sad scene where he's about to leave and Leah comes to him and she's sobbing and she's begging and she's like, please do not leave me, like, you're my big brother, like, I need you, don't leave me here. And he just kind of looks at her and he's like, I can't do this, I'm sorry, and he runs. And it's so interesting when you read this book, and what you guys will see happens in a minute. He said found family only. Sorry, he left Leah for dead. He gets to New York and Meredith is there in her beautiful, I think it's a townhouse, like the OG New York style townhouse. It also could be like a crazy penthouse apartment in the sky. All I need to know is that it's luxurious and Meredith has shmoney. She is there with her brother Caleb, who is not on here because he's like only in 2 scenes. Sorry, Caleb. But they all just hang out for several days and imagines himself living this life, knowing that when he graduates, if he didn't have an apartment, he could just move into Meredith and Caleb's apartment in New York and be with her. On New Year's Eve, Caleb throws a big party. Oliver is having the time of his life. Him and Meredith walk to Times Square to watch the ball drop, and as the ball drops, they kiss and they just kind of hold hands and walk through the city. They go back and they, you know, didn't want to pop in. For the rest of the break, they spend their entire day wandering and exploring the city, going to different restaurants, walking, museums. They hold hands and they kiss every single night. They get it on. And Oliver is like, for the first time since I've been away from him, I haven't thought about James. He thinks maybe this is a sign and that he should be with Meredith, but then he remembers when James was there for Thanksgiving, he didn't really think about Meredith, so he's just really confused. And they go back to Delacour after the Christmas break, and once again he gets to see James and Ren be all touchy-feely and all over each other, and he immediately feels that jealousy once again. So he is confused. Okay, Oliver Mark, he knows by panic in a way you do. So like, once again, another break has happened, which means another assignment and auditions. And this year, for the first time in 50 years, Delacour is going to put on King Lear, and everyone is really surprised and really shocked because if you guys don't know, King Lear is hard to cast. If you're in a college, there's older characters, like much older characters, and also, like I said, this is a competitive school. There's only 7 of them, so they've never really had the cast to make it happen. They all do their auditions and they're like, okay, we will all get the same roles that we always do. But Philippa is like, I think you guys will be pleasantly surprised, and everyone's like, okay. So it comes out that Camille and Frederick are going to be in the play with them, playing the older characters. The 3 girls get cast, and they're cast as obviously the main, the side, and Philippa's just kind of like there for decoration. But James is cast as Edmund, who is this seductive, like ruthless liar villain. Oliver is selected as James's friend, but kind of like a foil in every sense of the word. He's unfailingly loyal and honest. He doesn't suffer fools, which Alexander is the fool. And for the first time, ML Rio starts to really paint a picture of what's happening and what has happened if you understand the Shakespeare references. So King Lear is about an older man who makes a stupid and selfish decision, and he does it kind of out of love and loyalty and feeling like he's kind of like obligated to, but it ends up ruining everything that he wanted to do in the first place. Now James's character, okay, Edmund, his this ambition ultimately leads to his downfall, and him orchestrating what he wants to happen is what leads to his downfall. So remember that about how Oliver's character is super loyal, even to a fault. His character in King Lear actually notes that fellowship lightens troubles, making them easier to bear because solitary people suffer more acutely. Traditionally, they would go to the Boar's Head to celebrate, but only Meredith and Pippa are there when they're going over their castings, and Oliver notes that this definitely feels like the end of an era. And as soon as they start working on the play, he says Richard's absence is immediately felt, especially because he brought such a huge presence to the stage. He was very foreboding and he was very scary. But through the grapevine, low-key Delacour, yeah. The grapevine, Oliver finds out that James's audition had actually been very reminiscent to Richard, in the sense that he had been very unhinged, is the word that was used to describe it, and very angry. So Oliver is like, what is going on with him? After rehearsal, Oliver goes back to the castle because now he has to start cleaning, because remember, he's on financial aid. He's just lamenting on how he ended up as basically the maid for all of his friends. The castle is beautiful and they have a huge living room with a fireplace in it. He goes to clean the fireplace, and inside of it he notices a piece of fabric that is bloody and burnt. He's a little bit shook, and Oliver starts to think, okay, could this be connected to Richard? No, this is probably not connected to Richard. Anybody could have been here. We've all been gone for the holidays. I mean, this fireplace never gets cleaned. This could have been here ages ago. But in his heart of hearts, he knows it has to do with Richard, and he starts to think and contemplate for a second who could have done it, and could it have been somebody at the party. And before he can even speculate who walks in, boom, Detective Colburn, and Oliver is shooky and he's like, oh, what are you doing here? And Colburn's like, I just wanted to welcome you guys back to campus, like see what was going on. And they start talking about Shakespeare and acting, and Colburn like doesn't really get the whole like Shakespeare thing. Oliver is like, listen, I don't care, Mr. Blue Lives, I only feel alive when I'm acting. Ever since I was a little kid, Shakespeare has been the only thing that's allowed me to feel alive. I can't live without it. I can't live without my friends, and if I didn't have Shakespeare in my life, I'd rather not be alive. And Colburn just kind of looks at him and he's like, you know, what you're describing in law enforcement, we call that addiction. And Oliver's just kind of like, before he can reply, Colburn's like, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about Richard and also the slight differences in a lot of what you say happened that night. I have some more questions because now that the forensics have come back and stuff, like math ain't mathin'. And Oliver's like, what? And Colburn's like, yeah, the lake, the math, Richard, it's not mathing. Because Oliver is scared, right? Because he was operating under the assumption that nobody did anything to Richard and that it was an accident. They have been complicit in what happens. They technically didn't like do it, right? All these little clues are starting to lead up to a bigger picture. He's scared that he thinks Colburn thinks he did it, but actually Colburn turns to Oliver and goes, you know, I really like you. I find you to be the most honest, upstanding out of all of them. And if you find anything, all I can ask is that you please bring it to me. If you hear anything, if you see anything suspicious, please trust me. And Oliver's like literally with the bloody rag buried in the ashes behind him. As soon as Colburn leaves, Oliver takes the fabric, he puts it in a mug, and he puts it in the undercroft part of a theater where you like go and get ready, and there's like a janitorial room that nobody ever goes into, and there's a locker in there that nobody ever goes into. So he literally put it like in a circle, in a circle, in a circle. And he rushes to go to class. He gets there and James is like, where have you been? And Oliver's like, chill on me, like I was cleaning and then I had some errands to run. I was talking to Colburn, and James is like, you were talking to Colburn? Just blocking the play. The vibe is awkward, and James has a Richard syndrome in the way that he just decides to divert what Camille's telling him to do, and he has a sword ready because they're doing King Lear, and boom, he bashes Oliver in the face with the pommel of his sword. Oliver's nose starts leaking blood and he has to go to the infirmary, and Camille just starts cussing James out for not listening and being violent, because we come to find out that Oliver's nose is broken. And Frederick and Gwen come to him and they're like, hey, after Richard's passing, Dean Hollenshed and like the police kind of have like a really close eye on this theater program, and they think it's toxic, so they might just shut it down. Could you just say it was an accident? Like, don't tell anybody what happened. And they all know that it wasn't an accident. They all know that James got mad and hit Oliver in the face and broke his nose on purpose. And now Oliver is like, wow, James started taking Richard's roles, and now he started to take Richard's personality. This is great. Oliver, of course, loves James, so he just begrudgingly agrees, and he walks back to the castle where he finds Alexander, and Alexander is really sad and morose, and Oliver finally just like sits down and he's like, please give me something to make it stop hurting, like the physical pain, the mental pain. And Alexander just passes him a joint, and they talk and they smoke outside until Oliver says that he started to feel numb physically and mentally. And then Meredith comes and finds them, and she just looks at him and she feels really sad, kisses him, and she leads him inside to the bed to go to sleep. After taking the longest nap in the world, Oliver wakes up and Meredith is nowhere to be seen, but it's actually Pippa, and they start to talk about James and how he's been absent from class and how he hasn't been showing up, and she begs Oliver to talk to him and have the tough conversation that they've kind of been like dancing around the whole time. And Oliver begrudgingly again is like, fine, I will do this, even though I don't even want to have this conversation. And he goes to find James and he just explodes. James starts yelling, and he is saying how angry he is and how even when he's not angry he feels like he should be angry. And Oliver is looking at James, and he is contemplating in this moment, just confessing his feelings for him and laying it all on the line, finally having the hard conversation they need to. But instead he looks at him and he asks how he is, and James replies that he wants to hurt the whole world, in that he places his palms on Oliver's chest. And I'm like, are you guys about to kiss me now? After the conversation, James is kind of calmed down. Philippa, Oliver, Ren, James, and Meredith for the first time are all quietly working and studying like they used to, when all of a sudden Colin rushes in and he's like, have you guys seen Alexander? And they realize, oh shit, Alexander isn't with us. No, we haven't. And Colin had come there looking for Alexander, so when he notices that Alex isn't with them, he immediately knows something's wrong. So they knock on the door and Alexander doesn't answer, and Oliver and Colin and James decide to break the door down, and inside they find Alexander surrounded by bottles of pills laying on the floor unconscious, but he is thankfully still alive. So they hurry up and they start to give him chest compressions, and Oliver calls the ambulance. They come and take Alexander, and afterwards everyone is panicking and they're all going to the infirmary with him, but instead of going, Oliver runs into the woods, same way that Richard did the night that he disappeared, and he screams at the top of his lungs, starts crying because he's come through. The next day, only 4 out of the 6 that are left end up going to class, and for the first time we see Gwendolyn like kind of being chill and not like putting her foot on their neck. But of course she's always going to stir the pot, and she talks about the fact that James and Meredith are both playing the leads in King Lear and they have zero chemistry. Actually give siblings on stage, and she talks about the fact that they have to kiss and they have to really sell it. Oliver is like, this is torture, like this is my personal circle of Dante's Inferno. They get up and they end up kissing in the book. Emma Rio says it a savage kiss where they are like almost ripping at each other. And after this, Oliver is just like basically in the fetal position in his chair, just like rocking back and forth. He doesn't want to deal with it, so he goes to Frederick's class. He's really shaken, and Frederick is such a sweetheart, and he's like, you know what, it's okay, sit down, have a cup of tea, I'll make you some. When Oliver sits down to take the tea, he drops the teacup and it shatters everywhere, and he freaks out, and Frederick's like, it's okay, like tell me what's going on. Oliver just can't. He leaves the school. Now we are in the present again with Detective Colburn and Oliver, and they are in a room that he shared with James, and Colburn is like, okay, what's going on? I need to know the relationship with James. And Oliver is like, I can't. Colburn's like, this entire time you've been dancing around it, and Oliver's like, duh, because it's really hard to talk about and even harder to quantify. But he does admit that he did like James, partly because they were friends, but more so because he said James was everything that he wasn't as a person. And he says that he thinks James liked him because Oliver is naive and ordinary. And he said that they were friends, they were enamored with each other and sometimes more, but he could never really figure out or put his finger on exactly what they were. So sad. Like, Oliver has no self-esteem. I do think on some point James liked Oliver's innocence and his honor. I don't think he necessarily thought he was like a fool or kept him around for like narcissistic supply. I think Oliver really doesn't view himself in the way that everybody else does, which best people never do really. Ultimately, that will play into what happens in the culmination of the book. Whether it's right or wrong, it's really sad. The next day, they go to the theater to see the set design for King Lear. Because remember, Delacour doesn't just do a Shakespearean play. Julius Caesar was about politicians, and in this year, the set design for King Lear has a mirrored floor that reflects thousands of lights from above it. So they kind of are walking on a sea of glass stars, to the point where Oliver is like, we didn't want to walk on it because we thought it was going to break. So they kind of like hesitantly take their first couple steps on it, and they're like, it's very, very disorienting. And from then on, they just jump into it. Time kind of passes fast, as Oliver notes all times in between casting and the production due, and he says over the weeks they just continue to get completely isolated from each other. Alexander is back, but he's going through withdrawal, and Colin and Pippa are kind of at his side 24/7, monitoring him to make sure he doesn't relapse. Ren is just completely withdrawn. She stays in her room unless he is at her mandatory classes. They do not see her. And Oliver is just bouncing back and forth between hooking up with Meredith and sleeping in her room, and kind of spending time with James and sleeping in his room. And he says at night he does dream of James, and he dreams of Meredith, and he dreams of them together, but mostly he dreams of Richard. He is also plagued with a lot of guilt about the fact that Alexander almost died right in front of them, in kind of a similar way to Richard, in the sense that they all found him semi-unconscious on the brink of death, and how Alexander was the one to stop them when they were going to get Richard, and how they saved Alex and didn't save Richard. They performed the play, and he watches James and Meredith kiss again, and it's just like hate kissing, like there is no passion, and they're just kind of tearing each other apart, and he feels a little bit better. Of course, once again, we have the after party for the play. This is where this book gets a little bit repetitive. It's a college. You can only have another semester after a semester after a semester, another play after another play after another play, a test. You know what I mean? Reading it is a bit tedious, even though the experience of living it necessarily isn't tedious. When they have the party, it's kind of dead. Nobody wants to kind of hang out with them anymore. They're almost viewed as kind of cursed, and James is nowhere to be found. So Oliver is just kind of putzing around, and he goes out to the back garden where he finds Meredith, and she's crying, and he's like, what's going on? She's like sobbing gently, and she's like, I have something to tell you, but I can't talk to you about it right now. And Oliver is like, okay. And he sits there, and they talk for a little bit, and they sit in silence. He goes inside to go to bed, and then he goes to find James. Finds James in the library and trying to talk to him, but James is like being weird. So they're talking in lines from King Lear, but James is taking the lines and manipulating them and making them really dark and like kind of malicious almost, because he's really drunk and he's really angry. For the first time in a while, Oliver admits to us and to himself that he is frightened of James. James is being weird, and he decides to storm out, and in a panic he knocks over a candle, lighting some of the books on fire. Oliver panics and starts putting them out. James could care less, just leaves the room. And as he's getting the fire under control, Philippa comes in looking for some vodka, and she's like, she helps him clean up and decides maybe drinking isn't the best thing for us tonight. This night is scaring me, like something in the air is different. Oliver agrees, and he's really shaken by the fact that Pip is upset because she is kind of the strongest one, the unflappable one, who's really kind of weathered all the storms that this entire year has thrown at them. She also doesn't get in their business. She's a really supportive and loving friend, and she just looks at Oliver and kind of contemplates for a second before she warns him about James. And she says, be careful of James, and be careful of romantic relationships with James. I personally don't think he is who he was when we first met him, and I don't think he's good for you. Oliver agrees that James kind of seems unhinged, and every day he looks different than the guy that he fell for. So they talk a little bit. Oliver's like, whatever, I'm gonna go to bed. And there he finds James by a broken mirror that he punched. There's glass everywhere, and Oliver's kind of tiptoeing around it, and he tries to go up to James, and James shoves him, and Oliver again is wary of the glass. So now we have James hurting Oliver in the way that Richard was hurting James. As James is leaving, he begs Oliver to leave him alone and get a life and stop following him. But Oliver refuses, because he said, the last time I let one of my friends storm away, that was the last time I saw him alive. And James is really upset by this, and he goes up to Ren and he says, come to bed with me. In front of Oliver to almost be spiteful, which it does hurt Oliver's feelings. Ren agrees to go to bed with him and they go in the room and close the door. Oliver's just left looking stuck on stupid. The next morning, Oliver wakes up after sleeping in Pippa's room because he's definitely not gonna go back to his room when James and Ren are in bed together. And he is super morose. For the first time after Richard's passing, he decides to go into his room. Richard's room has kind of been kept almost like pristine. That some things have been taken out, important things, but he notices a lot more of Richard's things are there than he thought would be, and he's really upset by this. So he just goes back to his room with James and decides to clean because James is not there, but the mess he made is, and he decides to make James's bed. In doing this, he realizes something is weird and discovers that there's like a big cut up hole in the mattress. Get your mind out of the gutter. Oliver reaches inside James's mattress and feels something metal, and he's confused, so he gives it a big yank and out comes a boat hook with blood all dried and smeared in all of the crevices. Oliver is like, oh my god, and he books it to the fine arts building with the hook. He goes back to the basement, puts the hook with the bloody cloth in the locker, and then he goes back to the theater because he realized he overslept. Nobody woke him up. Performance of King Lear is about to start. So he runs upstage, does his makeup really fast, puts on his costume, and barely makes it to the stage before it is time for the opening call. And he's rushing, he's panicking, and he gets there, and Alexander's standing there prim and proper in his costume. Oliver is like, where is everyone? Alex is like, I don't know, hopefully they'll be here before their call time. James is on stage performing. Oliver takes his cue and he goes out and they're acting. James can immediately tell that something is different even though they're on stage in front of everyone, so they can't break character. But Oliver notes as he's reading his lines and the lines that they were quoting specifically last night from King Lear, he can see the realization dawning on James's face that he knows Oliver knows. And he says, the weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. I'm not gonna tell on you, but we're definitely gonna have a conversation about this. Oliver plans to confront James at intermission and let him know that he took the hook out of his bed. And he gets off stage and he sees Meredith and he grabs her and he just gives her a big kiss, and he's like, you know what, for my entire life I've understood Shakespeare back and forward. The tragedies, the comedy, I could act, I could tell you King Lear, I could tell you Hamlet, but you make me understand something that I never would before, and that's Shakespeare's sonnets. You make me understand how Shakespeare talks about desire and longing. Asked her to never ever kiss James or anyone ever again, and immediately this beautiful moment they were having is ruined, and Meredith is super upset. She's like, you didn't even want me, you're only saying this because of James, like you only care about James, you're just jealous, it's not about me. She storms off and Oliver is like, maybe she has a point. Soon as she walks away, James comes walking off stage and Oliver looks at him and challenges him to lie and say, tell me that you did not hurt Richard. James is immediately like, listen, it was an accident. Oliver is like, bullshit, I found the bloody hook, tell me what happened. The night that this all happened, how they were all in the party and James and Ren were hanging out, and again, Richard did not like James around Ren. He started in on James, and Ren, being the sweetie that she is, decided to tell Richard enough, and he basically physically assaulted her. He pushed her and I think he yanked her as well, and she was really upset and actually pretty shaken up and hurt by it, physically and emotionally. And James was livid. After he threw Ren, Richard stormed off and James is checking on her, and this little angel face literally begs James to go after Richard to make sure that he doesn't hurt himself. James, being unable to say no to Ren, decides to. So when he finds him, Richard immediately starts making fun of James and being homophobic, saying that him and Oliver should just get it over with already and admit their feelings to each other and have their conversation. And then Richard grabs James and shoves him into the boathouse on the edge of the lake. James, obviously being much smaller than Richard, isn't really interested in fighting, but Richard's kind of blocking the door. And he's like, no, big man, get up and fight. Get up and fight. Like, you want to feel my shoes? Get up and fight. When James gets up, Richard pushes him down again, and without thinking, he reaches over, grabbing for something behind him, and swings, and he hits Richard in the face, sending him over the edge of the boathouse dock into to the water. Oliver is not really surprised by this, but what surprises him the most is that James continues on, letting him know that after he did this, he ran and he was super scared, but he ran into Pippa. She's known the entire time that James killed Richard. She helps him take off his bloody clothes and tucks him into bed, and she takes care of them, which now we know that is the burnt fabric that Oliver found in the fireplace. So now Oliver not only has the weapon that would put the person that he is basically in love with away, but he has the object that would get Pippa locked up a decent amount of charges, especially if you consider tampering with evidence, lying to the police. They could even get her on conspiracy to commit, depending on how active Colburn is on catching somebody, which Oliver knows Colburn has been dying to get somebody for Richard since it happened, and he knows this would not end well for either of them. Oliver's rightfully super upset, but in the vein of Bunny Corcoran, he looks at James and he's like, why didn't you tell me? Like, what the hell? And James admits to him that having Oliver look at him in that light and see the horror flash across his face is one of the big reasons that he never told him, and that he couldn't stand that Oliver might be able to look at him in a different light than he does now. And Oliver's like, well, too late. Then intermission is over. They have to go right back on stage. Everyone delivers a stellar performance. It's Oliver's closing lines and he is unable to say them. Frederick and Gwendolyn are like, hello, but he just stays silent and they take their final bows. It is their final performance as fourth-year students. Everyone is cheering. They go off stage for the after party, and Colburn emerges from the crowd asking, are you ready to tell the truth? And before James can speak and anybody else realizes what's happening, Oliver looks at Colburn and he says, yes, I'm ready to tell the truth. He proceeds to say, I am the one that killed Richard. Everyone is panicking. Philippa and Meredith are looking at him with shock and horror in their eyes. James can barely speak. He's standing there frozen. Alexander is being like, no, no, no. Colin, Frederick, Gwendolyn, everybody is like, what the? They handcuff Oliver and they take him in a police car. As they're driving away, again, all of his friends are just standing there, and in the background, Oliver says that he sees a figure of Richard looking at him, disappointed and sad as well. And at the police station, he recites James's story, saying that he was the one that went to check on Richard after the fight, and that Richard accused him and hit him, and it was self-defense. Colburn is not buying it because he says an anonymous source came to him and said that James is the one that killed Richard. And this throws Oliver through a loop because that means somebody outside of Pippa and himself has known what's happened this entire time. He refuses to budge. He says that it was him. That night, Colburn has no choice but to let him tell his statement. Alex and Pip come to visit Oliver and ask why he confessed and why he lied, and Pippa, for the first time, reveals the reason that she never talks about her family is because her dad is in prison for life, and that she is terrified for Oliver, somebody who is very thin, very twink-like. The prison is not the place that he wants to be. He explains that this is his chance to change the ending of a tragedy, to be able to be a hero and take the fall for his friend. And Philip was like, if this was a Shakespeare play, you wouldn't be the hero, you would be the fool. And Alex just sits there really upset and realizes he can't change his mind. Oliver's in his cell, and later that night, James visits Oliver and he begs him to recant and asks Oliver to let him take accountability for what he did and let him face the music. Oliver knows, if I couldn't hack it in prison, James won't last a week. So he says that he can't, and to let him do this, let me do this for you. He pleads guilty. It's a very speedy trial, and he is sentenced second-degree murder, 10 years in prison, which catches us up to the beginning of the novel when we meet him after serving those years with Detective Colburn. So now that the story is told, the novel jumps back to the beginning, and Colburn is like, I thought this story would give me closure, but it doesn't. Like, it actually just makes me sad. This guy was really not that good of a guy. Obviously, you shouldn't unalive somebody, but it really was an accident, and a really good, honest person took the fall for somebody that he loved. The person he loves just left him for dead, because you find out that James has not visited Oliver one singular time since he has been incarcerated, outside of the day that he asked him to not take the fall for his crime. And neither has Meredith. Both refused to testify at his trial, either either as a character witness or a witness for the defense. Colburn leaves. He takes one last look at Delacour and the lake and James and Pippa, and he thanks them for being honest and having this conversation with him. And he asks Oliver, what are you gonna do? And he is like, I'm just gonna try to live my life, move on, but the first thing that I need to do, I need to see James. And Philippa kind of gives him a look and says, I have something that I need to tell you. And she proceeds to tell him that 4 years ago they all stopped hearing from James. One day they got a call from the police that they had found his car and an empty bottle of pills by a river. So James unfortunately has taken his own life and died in a body of water in the same way Richard did. When he hears this, he is distraught. He's enraged that Philippa and the rest of them have kept this from him for 4 years, but they honestly were like, we wanted you to come out of that jail and we did not know if you would have just taken your own life as well, if you knew that James wasn't waiting for you on the outside. And that would have been 3 friends that I've lost, and I selfishly couldn't do that. And Oliver looks at her in the moment and he forgives her. He realizes that although everyone has always said he is the best of them, really Pippa is the best of them. All these years, why you never told anyone the truth and why you never snitched on James the night that it happened. And she says that she would have done anything to protect their friend group because this is literally the only family that she has. And she also was afraid that Oliver would do what he did. She thought if she told Oliver about the crime, he would go and confess before any of them could stop him, and they would all have to keep going on. And she hoped at the very least they could work out the last year and have one good year before they were separate for the rest of their lives. Pippa offers for him to come live with her and Camille, but he's like, I actually have an idea and I have other plans. And he asked her to drop him off at the bus station. She's like, will I ever talk to you again? Will I ever see you? And he's like, of course. He talks about coming to see her and Camille, and she said, I really would love that. Gets on the bus and you don't know where he's going until you realize he ends up at Meredith's house. And when he knocks on the door, she slams the door in his face. She's uninterested. She's like, do not talk to me. And he bangs and he bangs and he bangs, and she finally lets him in. Talks for hours and hours, and they start to talk about that last year, and she brings up the kiss with James. Remember when Detective Colburn says that there was an anonymous source that told him that James was responsible for the murder of Richard? You find out that it was Meredith. That night that she was crying in the garden, she had figured out that James was the one who had done it. They were unable to find her because she had went in the middle of the night to Detective Colburn's to tell him that James killed Richard, which is why the next morning after the performance, he was there with the cuss bright and ready. He starts to talk to Meredith about his relationship with James, and he admits to her that he was in love with James, and he can now openly say that. Meredith is like, I always knew that. He says, you know, that doesn't mean that I didn't have feelings for you. And she says, where are you gonna stay now that you're out of prison? And Oliver's like, I don't know. And she's like, come stay with me. Stay here. I have this big apartment. Nobody's ever here and I'm so lonely. And Oliver decides to say, okay. He says they fall into a comfortable rhythm, and he starts to get really comforted and accustomed to her presence. And one day he's just, you know, going about his daily routine with his girl, and he opens up the mailbox to find a letter from Pippa. He is super excited because he finally feels like he's ready to keep that promise about keeping in touch. But inside is a suicide letter from James, and Pippa apologizes for once again keeping secrets and keeping this from him, but she thought if she gave him the letter right when he was released from prison, then it might be really disabling to him. So he opens it, and in it, it's a passage from Pericles where James essentially admits that he might be alive. Yep, you heard it here, folks. Literally, remember when I said all they found was an empty pill bottle and a car? James essentially sends a passage about Pericles, which is a person who is dead, who has killed a version of themselves, but is still alive. Oliver immediately goes to Meredith's computer and starts looking up signs of life for James and seeing if he can find any proof that he's still alive. And you get this kind of like Sherlock Holmes, the hunt is on vibe. And again, he betrays Meredith's trust by looking looking for James and hoping that James is alive and potentially thinking about going to find him. And that is how the novel ends. He is the president of the IFF, president of the Down Bad Society, and he literally should just get a TLC show and be in a plural relationship. Now you guys understand if you've watched my Dark Academia book, because what do you mean you spent the entire novel just to tell us that the guy who murdered someone who then killed himself is most likely alive, speaking in riddles for his ex-best friend slash ex-love to come find him? Oliver still has a weird sense of disloyalty to both of them because neither one of them visited him, neither one of them stood up for him at the trial. If they were so unhappy with him lying, they could have spoke up and they didn't. That is where ML Rio leaves us. Nothing really has been established or defined. It's a really complex and interesting book where, like I said, you have to understand the Shakespearean passages to really understand what they're saying. So I do recommend Googling while reading. I didn't read all of them to you today just because I can't, I did point out the important ones. That's all she wrote, folks. In peace, Richard. In the comments, I will obviously reply with all my theories and opinions. Thank you guys for watching. See you in my next video.